What would you sacrifice for eternal love? In a powerful kingdom, a young woman traded the one thing that made her special, her voice. In return, a king fell hopelessly in love with her. But the spell that bound his heart slowly began destroying the entire kingdom. In a kingdom where gold filled the palace vaults and power flowed like wine, a young woman made a choice so haunting that even centuries later, people whisper about it. She traded her voice for a king's eternal love. And once the ritual was done, neither of them could ever escape it. But the truth behind her sacrifice is far darker than anyone imagined. Because sometimes, silence is not peace. Sometimes, silence is a prison. Long ago, in a prosperous kingdom surrounded by endless rivers and fertile lands, there ruled a wealthy monarch named King Alaric. Alaric had everything a man could desire: golden halls, armies that feared nothing, advisors who bowed at every word, and riches so vast that traders traveled from distant lands just to glimpse his palace. Yet the king was not a happy man. Despite the glittering kingdom around him, his heart remained restless. Many women had tried to win his affection. Princesses from neighboring lands arrived with jewels and silk gowns. Noble daughters brought poetry and songs. But none could capture the king's heart. Alaric listened politely, then dismissed them all. Some said the king's heart had turned to stone. Others believed he simply feared love. You are watching Promiscuous Stories, the home of authentic African narratives that touch the soul and teach the heart. Today, we dive into a tale of a woman who sold her voice for something much more, a decision that changed their lives forever. Before we begin, hit that subscribe button. Your next life lesson is just a story away. But deep within the quiet villages of the kingdom lived a young woman who believed something different. Her name was Elira. Elira was not noble. She did not wear silk or gold. She lived in a small cottage beside a forest, where the wind moved softly through ancient trees. But there was something about Elira that made people stop and listen. Her voice. It was gentle, yet powerful. When she spoke, people felt calm. When she sang, the birds seemed to pause in the trees. Travelers passing through the village often said her voice felt like warm sunlight after a long winter. Yet Elira carried a secret longing. She dreamed of a life beyond the quiet forest. And when stories of the lonely king reached her ears, something inside her stirred. Not ambition. Not greed. But curiosity. Why would a man who owned an entire kingdom still feel empty? One evening, while gathering herbs in the forest, Elira encountered someone who would change her life forever. An old woman sat beside a twisted oak tree. Her clothes were worn, and her eyes gleamed with a strange knowing light. "Child," the old woman said softly, "why do you walk the forest with such a heavy heart?" Elira hesitated. Then she spoke the truth. "I wish to understand the king." The old woman smiled slowly. "Understanding him is easy. But winning his love requires a price few could pay." Elira's curiosity deepened. "What price?" The old woman leaned closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "Your voice." The wind suddenly stirred the leaves above them. Elira stared at the woman, unsure if she had heard correctly. "My voice." The old woman nodded. "The king has grown tired of words. Promises. Lies. Every woman who has approached him tried to charm him with speech. But silence is something he has never known." Elira frowned. "I don't understand." The old woman's eyes darkened slightly. There is an ancient ritual. A binding of souls. If you surrender your voice, his heart will belong to you forever. Elira's heart began to array. See. Forever. The word echoed through her mind. But what happens to me? She asked. The old woman paused. You will never speak again. The forest seemed to grow colder. No singing. No stories. No laughter. Only silence. Elira returned home that night with the old woman's words haunting her thoughts. For days she wrestled with the choice. Her voice had always been her greatest gift. It connected her to the world. It was how she expressed joy, sorrow, hope. To lose it would mean losing a part of herself. But the promise of the ritual was powerful. A king's heart. A life beyond the forest. A love that would never fade. Finally, under the pale glow of a full moon, Elira returned to the twisted oak tree. The old woman was waiting. You have decided, she said calmly. Elira nodded. The ritual began. A small silver blade glimmered in the moonlight. Ancient symbols were drawn in the soil. The wind circled them like a silent witness. The old woman whispered words from a language older than the kingdom itself. Then she held out a small vial. Your voice will live inside this. Elira felt fear creeping into her chest. But she did not turn away. With trembling hands, she took the blade. And with one final breath, she made her sacrifice. The forest fell silent. Completely silent. When Elira opened her mouth, no sound came out. Her voice was gone. Inside the vial, a faint shimmering glow appeared. The old woman sealed it with wax. It is done, she said. From this moment, the king's heart will belong to you. The next morning, Elira arrived at the palace gates. The guards laughed at first. A silent village girl asking to see the king. But something about her calm presence unsettled them. Eventually, word reached the palace. King Alaric agreed to see her, if only out of curiosity. When Elira entered the throne room, the court expected another hopeful admirer. Instead, they found a young woman who said nothing. She simply looked at the king. Calm. Still. Unmoving. For the first time in years, the king felt something shift inside him. No compliments. No desperate attempts to impress him. Only silence. Days passed. Elira remained at the palace. She communicated through small gestures and written notes. And strangely, the king found himself drawn to her. He began visiting her chambers. Sitting beside her. Sometimes speaking. Sometimes saying nothing at all. The silence between them became comfortable. Peaceful. For the first time in his life, the king felt understood. Months later, the kingdom celebrated a royal wedding. King Alaric married the silent maiden. The people were confused, but hopeful. Perhaps their lonely king had finally found happiness. Yet the truth of the ritual slowly began to reveal itself. Because the king's devotion was not ordinary love. It was absolute. Unbreakable. He could not imagine life without her. He refused to travel without her. Refused to make decisions without her presence. And slowly, the weight of the kingdom began to shift. Ministers complained. The king ignored them. Wars threatened. The king stayed beside Elira. The court began to whisper. The king was no longer ruling the kingdom. He was orbiting around one silent woman. At first, Elira believed the ritual had given her everything she wanted. But over time, the silence became unbearable. She could not comfort the king when he struggled. She could not warn him when advisors manipulated him. She could not speak the truth when the kingdom needed guidance. Her silence, once powerful, had become a prison. Years passed. The king grew more obsessed with protecting their bond. He dismissed advisors, closed the palace gates, and the once thriving kingdom slowly began to fade. All because of a love bound by magic and silence. One night, Elira found the vial hidden in the palace vault. Her voice shimmered inside it, just as it had the night she sacrificed it. She realized the terrible truth. The ritual had not created love. It had created dependence. A tether. And as long as the spell existed, neither of them could truly be free. Tears filled her eyes as she held the vial. If she broke it, she might regain her voice. But the spell would break. The king might stop loving her. And everything she sacrificed would be meaningless. For hours she stood in silence. Finally, she made one last choice. With trembling hands, she dropped the vial. It shattered against the stone floor. Light burst through the room like a rising dawn. And for the first time in years, Elira spoke. Her voice echoed through the empty halls. Soft, beautiful, alive. But somewhere deep within the palace, the king suddenly felt something change. The binding spell had broken. And now, for the first time since they met, his love would have to be real, or disappear forever. And that is a story the kingdom would never forget. Because sometimes the greatest love is not the one bound by magic, but the one that chooses to stay even after the spell is gone. So now I ask you, if love required the greatest sacrifice, would you give up your voice for it? Or would you risk losing everything just to remain yourself? Because in the end, true love should never require silence.